Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. What's that?
Yep, okay. I think we're all in.
Okay, yeah,
right
you
now.
tell me when. I was like, when I heard this blank there, I was like, I don't know, did she leave or did she?
No, I'm still here.
Okay, so I see the numbers are going up quickly, so it's okay with me if you want to wait another minute, whatever you want to do.
Nope, I'll start the introduction and then we could go in as those.
Okay, so I don't jump in, you jump in.
Yep. Welcome, everybody, to the May Lunch with NEMA. I'm Heather with the New England Museum Association, and today we will be talking with Marilyn, Weiss, Cruickshank about 7 ways to stay organized at work. I think we all probably need that one. Can everybody hear me? On the chat feature over there, if you guys want to introduce yourself, that would be great, and tell us where you're from. Everybody's starting to type there. That'd be great. This is also going to be our way to communicate with each other. So if you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to pop in the chat feature and ask your question. And during the presentation, I will be kind of interrupting Marilyn just to ask a couple questions. I know there's a lot to talk about today, especially, we all have these organizational issues. Good. Looks like we have a good group today. I also want to say thank you to Museum Trek for sponsoring our Lunch with NEMA series. Okay, as we get more people on. Great, everybody. And so I just want to do a quick introduction about Marilyn. In her consulting business, Creative Simplicity, Organizing, and Productivity, Marilyn works with clients and teaches classes and workshops, helping professionals to get organized and be more efficient with their time, space, and possessions. For Museum, her work takes the form of kickstart consultations, I can't talk today, focusing on better managing time, information, and workload. One-on-one work with museum staff to streamline office and storage spaces, and interactive group workshops for staff, volunteers, and board members to improve personal and professional productivity. Marilyn has over 2 decades of experience helping museums, historic sites, and cultural organizations fulfill their educational mission. She is a past recipient of AAM's Nancy Hawk Award for Professional Excellence and is a former NEMA board member. She also holds an MBA with concentration in nonprofit management. Marilyn also helps out quite a bit here at NEMA, speaking at conferences and workshops. So Marilyn, I'm going to let you finish your introduction.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. It's great that everybody wants to spend their lunch hour thinking about getting organized, and thank you to Heather and Meg and the rest of the NEMA staff for inviting me to do this webinar and focusing on the topic of organizing, which is something that's, I think, important to all of us, even though we may not realize it sometimes. So our focus today is 7 ways to stay organized at work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the context a little bit for what we're going to do. We're going to talk about what is organizing just a little bit and organizing in museums and how that's a little unique. And then we're going to proceed on a countdown from 7 to 1. And we're going to talk about the important components of the organizing process. For purposes of the webinar, we're going to discuss organizing your physical space. So this is a space that you work in every day, and you're trying to constantly sort of achieve that sense of order with everything that's there and everything that's coming at you every day. So let's jump in and get started. Okay, so for the basics of organizing, we have to sort of take a step back and think about what it is we're trying to do, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. For who, it's everyone. Really everyone in your museum can benefit from being more organized. It's a top-down, bottom-up kind of configuration. And if you're organized, it helps to keep the workflow moving. So that's beneficial for everyone. When we're talking about what is organizing, organizing is decision-making, right? It's not putting things off. It's actually doing things. And another misconception that's often out there is the confusion between organizing and cleaning. And organizing is not cleaning. Oftentimes I hear about museums that will do a clean-out day, which is awesome. It's getting a dumpster and kind of cleaning out all the clutter, and that's decluttering, and that's awesome. But it's not organizing. It's not setting up the systems that you need to move yourself forward. And when I say systems, we're going to talk a little bit about systems later on in the presentation, what they are and how you can help develop them for yourself. The when of organizing, well, we'd love to be able to do it and then not have to do it again, but it's an ongoing process, right? It's not a one-time event. And oftentimes what we need to do is we need to tweak the process as we go along because things happen, right? Life happens and kind of changes how we have to deal with things that are coming at us. It could be a workplace crisis, it could be an illness, a fire, a flood, a job change. Everything that comes at us, in life and in the professional workplace can alter the process of how we organize. The other thing that's kind of interesting about the organizing process for museums is we tend to have these really large projects that we work on, whether it's an exhibit project or a new program within the education function, or it's a grant that's due, and it kind of swallows us up, if you will. And we forget that we need to continue to maintain all the processes that we normally implement for organizing. The where of organizing sometimes stumps people a little bit, but the basic here is to start small, to take it in small bites. And you don't want to get hung up on looking for the perfect place to start. You want to start small. Just starting is the big issue there. The why of organizing, there are a million reasons why you should get more organized, but I'm going to focus on just 3 here, and increasing your productivity is clearly the first one. Clutter is going to affect your productivity. It's not going to allow you to focus and process information, and so kind of clearing your space, thinking more about how you do things and doing them better, that's going to make you work faster and more efficiently. The second reason that organizing is key is because we're often judged by our coworkers and office mates by the look of things, right? The look of your office is a lot about how you want to be perceived. Are you a professional? Does your space reflect that? And that's something to think about. And also with organizing, if you are disorganized, oftentimes stress kicks in, and it's really hard to find things and to focus on the task at hand. So all those directors and managers out there, it's important to support your staff in the process of organizing. Obviously will help with increasing productivity and reducing stress. So that's something important to think about as well. And then the how of organizing. Right, so how do we do it? Well, we have to make a commitment. We have to schedule it, right? If you don't make the time for it, it's probably not going to happen. But then once you make the time for it and it becomes a habit, it becomes something that you do automatically, and that's great, and that's something to consider. Now, when you schedule it, I don't mean just talk about scheduling. I mean actually put it in your calendar. Just like you would commit to a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, grab a couple of hours, a few minutes, whatever it is that works for your calendar, and schedule it. Some people like to schedule it quarterly so that they're always making sure they check on their systems. Sometimes like the first of the month, you sort of check in and say, okay, how are things going? Whatever it is, you want to schedule it. And just an interesting statistic to share with you, the Wall Street Journal recently reported that U.S. workers waste an average of 6 weeks per year. That's roughly 1 to 1.5 hours per day searching for missing information in messy desks, offices, and files. So digest that a little bit and think about that, how you'd get so much more done if you streamlined your processes and got rid of some of the excess and could save yourself an hour to an hour and a half a day. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about museums and the unique nature of museums. So we're collectors and we're savers, right? This is our mission. This is what we do. We tell stories. And to tell stories, we need the things to tell the stories. So oftentimes we have a lot of stuff around, or we want to repurpose stuff because we feel like if we got rid of it, then we might need it. And we also have limited resources to commit, right? We don't have endless amounts of money to buy containers and holders and fancy ways to make our office look, all of that. So that's sometimes a challenge as well. We share spaces, whether we have multiple office mates or just one office mate, or our spaces are very small, and oftentimes our spaces have multi-purposes, right? We have meetings in our spaces are for supplies and storage, a lot of dual purposes going on. So I find that sometimes we use these as excuses in the organizing process to not get organized, right? We say, well, I'm supposed to save this, I can't get rid of it, or I don't have any resources to put to it, I don't have any time to do it. So we want to avoid that, right? Our challenges are not insurmountable, and just because we collect and preserve doesn't mean we need to save everything. right? Because our spaces and our minds are full of clutter if we do that. Okay, so now we're going to jump into our countdown, and we're going to talk about the 7 areas of staying organized at work. The first one, number 7, is to realize you're not the same as your coworker. And this is about organizing that works for you and the way you live and the way you work. Organizing is an active process, and it's very personal. It is defining your identity, and the way you work is the core of effectiveness in organizing, because you don't want to adopt ways that other people work if it works for them and it doesn't work for you. Right? If you have a boss that tells you to file a certain way, but that doesn't make any sense to you when you go to retrieve things, that's not going to work. So you can duplicate some things that you may see people using different organizing systems that you want to duplicate, and that's great if they are positive for you and work for you. But try to be creative. Develop your own system. And when I talk about a system, what I mean is it's a skill. It's a way of doing things. Just like you learn to tie your shoes and then it becomes kind of a habit and you just know it, your way of organizing is a system of how you do things. For example, when you file, do you file alphabetically? Do you file by color? Do you, what works for you? So those are, different systems you can use. If you share a space, right? If you share a workspace, you need to communicate with your coworkers. It's really important to talk openly about your organizing style. If you don't talk about your organizing style, it's just like in a personal relationship, you have to communicate because you have to make sure that you're letting other people know how you're feeling. It's the same with your space because we all have different organizing styles. Some of us are extremely visual, right? We like to have everything out and accessible, see everything we own. Then there's others of us that like to tuck things away. Right? Everything goes in a drawer or a cabinet and is put away so we don't see it because that's our style of organizing. If you have 2 people that work in an office and one likes to be very visual and one likes to put things away, you're going to have a little bit of a tug of war there about how things work. So compromise is important and communication is important. And sometimes labeling works really well too. So that's kind of a nice compromise in the middle so that things are put away but they're labeled and in a container. So for realizing you're not the same as your coworkers, success will obviously look a little different for each person, as does the path to getting there. Your big goal here, you want to have an office where you can find what you need with minimal effort when you need it. Okay, so this is about you. Okay, number 6, you want to make your workspace work for you. Again, it's about you. You want to define your space. Like, what happens in your space? Is it just a workspace? Do you have meetings there? Do you do a lot of research in the space with reference materials? Do you eat there? Is it a shared space? What happens in your space? Really think about that. And you want to set it up for how it's used, right? You want the furniture and the items that will make it the most functional for you in using your space. You can ask yourself what works about the space and what doesn't work about the space. What modifications would you make to it? Sometimes it's really key to take a photo of your space because honestly, if it's a space that you're working in every day, you kind of don't see what's around you. You kind of don't see the clutter. You don't see how things are working. But sometimes if you take a photo of it, you see it with a fresh set of eyes. You can kind of look at how things are set up, and it allows you to take a step back. So try that if you feel like you can't make changes, you don't know kind of what is working for you and what's not working for you. The personalization of a space is great. It makes it feel like it's yours. It makes it feel good, but you don't want to overwhelm it with stuff. You don't want to bring back every, name tag from a conference and have it up on your bulletin board for, 10 years. You want to try to reduce the, the amount of family photos. You can have a couple. You should make the space feel good, right? You want to be able to work there, but it does affect your productivity if there's too much excess stuff. Okay. Now, in terms of making your workspace work for you, there's a couple of things you also need to think about in terms of defining the space. And that would be about setting up some zones. And the most key zone for you to start with that everyone's going to have is your active zone. And an active zone is kind of if you're sitting at your desk, in your desk chair, and you draw a circle around yourself, a 360-degree circle, and that would be your most active space. You should be able to reach everything you need in this circle, okay? So this would be your desk, your computer. These are some examples. Obviously, it doesn't have to be. Your phone, basic supplies, and active files that you're currently using. Okay, you're not going to crowd this space with every reference material you need to look at, twice a year. You're not going to have excess and extras in this space. So draw that 360-degree circle around where you sit, and this should be your active space. Okay, and that should help you reduce some of the things around you and put them in other places. Now, where do the other things go? So what you want to do is you want to think about other zones that you can create in your space. For example, you can create a reference section of your office. This would have any of the reference materials you need. Now, if these are reference materials that you refer to, every week, every month, that's great. They're still there. They're just coupled together in a space that's not your active space. If you have papers and things that are a little bit less important in terms of having them around, we usually define that as archival, right? We're all familiar with that term in this field. Your archive space can stay in your office. Oftentimes it's off-site as well. Sometimes it's a collective of different things from everyone in the museum that would keep it off-site for different reasons. But you may have some things that you need to refer to just once or twice a year, and they have to stay in your space, and that's fine. But you keep that in kind of an area that's your archive space. Many people also have a supply zone. This is for kind of the extras of the supplies. So you don't have every paper, every file, every knickknack, in your active space. You keep it kind of separate. The supply zone can be, sometimes I walk into offices that have, obviously you have extra supplies you order from, Staples or Office Max or WB Mason, but those shouldn't be in your active space. But sometimes your office is the one that's defined as the place that has to keep it. And that's fine, but you want to define that zone. Right? Keep those things together, but again, don't keep them in that circle, that 360-degree circle, that's your active space. Finally, for making your workspace work better for you, I want you all to think about looking up instead of down. Okay, you want to use the vertical space in your office. Some of you have dividers, some of you have walls. Hopefully, if you have a door, you can use the back of your door. But there's lots of different kinds of organizers, holders, wall pockets, message boards that you can use in your vertical space. And very often we have a tendency to look down instead of up. And you shouldn't have anything in the area under your desk where your feet go. I've been in a lot of offices lately where, for some reason, the extra copy paper ends up under people's desks where their feet are supposed to go, and so everybody's kind of working sideways, with their legs never going under their desks, and that's not productive, right? That's kind of crushing you in your space and not allowing you the space you need to work. So get those extras to another place. Your goal in making your workspace work for you is, as we said, defining your space and figuring out what works for you, but also lifting things off of your horizontal surfaces, right? You want to move and use that vertical space. Okay, so number 5, give everything a home. Now, most of you have probably heard of the expression, a place for everything, everything in its place. I want you to really think about this. And what does that mean for your office space? When you go to look for something, is it there? Right? Do you know where things are kept? Are you assigning homes to things? You shouldn't have to really think about it after a while. It should become kind of automatic. But when you're starting, you are thinking about it. You want to kind of define the areas where you want to keep things. You should always be able to remember where something goes, and if the item goes there, you should be able to return it to that spot, right? And then the next time you need it, you find it. And that's a principle that actually applies to your home as well. And a lot of these principles we're going over today apply to home organizing as well. But at home, for example, a place for everything would be identified in kind of a drop zone, if you will. When you get home, where do you put your cell phone and your keys and your purse or your briefcase? Where do you put those things so they're ready to go back out with you the next day? So a place for everything, everything in its place. Another way to describe that is organizers like to use the expression like with like, right? You keep similar items grouped together, right? If you have all your extra exhibit labels will be in one place. You keep stray papers maybe in a 3-ring binder, right? You corral things together, keep like with like. And something to remember there is you obviously can't put it away if you don't know where it goes. So that's what happens when we don't have a home for things. It just goes anywhere, right? It just gets put on the corner of your desk, and then things get piled on top of it, and you have no idea where it is. So that's something to consider. The other thing that sort of continues what we said in the last slide with looking at vertical space is I want you to remember that the floor is not a home for your things. And a couple of you are probably chuckling at this point because most office spaces I walk into, the floor is used as a storage space. It's not really supposed to be used as a storage space because in organizing, what we usually do on the floor is we pile things. And piles are considered deferred decisions. Right? If we're piling, we're not deciding on things, we're not placing them in their home, we're not dealing with them. Okay? So you need to think about dealing with the items and getting them to a home. So the floor should not be a home. You want shelving, cabinets, drawers, as we said, wall pockets, anything that kind of lifts it off the surface. And sometimes it's just a matter of decluttering and going through the things that are on the floor, because sometimes when our other surfaces are full, then we go to filling up the floor. So when you're jumping into organizing, sometimes the floor is a good place to start. Starts to lift all the things up, and it's nice to be able to see your floor. Okay. Create systems. So when we talk about creating systems, as I said before, we're kind of talking about creating habits. And habits move you more rapidly through your work and help to create a sense of order. Systems are to help you manage the workload, or they're techniques at home to help you manage your household. Systems keep things in equilibrium in both places. And you want to think about keeping your systems as simple as possible. If you can't explain what your system is, then you probably don't have it or it's not working for you. Okay? The simpler you keep it, the easier it will be for you. So here are some examples of pretty straightforward systems that you may use now and you don't even think of them as a system. For example, when you run a meeting, you use an agenda. That's your system for keeping the meeting going and in an organized manner. Okay? And when you run the meeting, sometimes you use the agenda to assign follow-up. Okay? That's great. That's a system. When you file, do you place the newest, most recent paper in the front of the file folder, or do you place it in the back? That's your system, right? When I file, I place my recent paper wherever it works for you to find it, right? The front or the back. So that's a system. Your incoming paper in your inbox twice a day. Okay, that's your system for staying on top of the paper that you have coming at you constantly. You use email folders for grouping messages that relate to the same topic, right? An efficient way to organize your desktop. And hopefully you go back and you have some scheduled maintenance of that as well, just like the organizing of your physical space. The digital organizing needs to have a lot of work done on it too at times. I return phone calls within 48 hours. That's a system. If you do that, maybe you return them within 24, even better. So hopefully you can see where this is going. You want to be able to explain it, you want it to be simple, and you want to have your systems. And as I said, the systems become habits, and then you kind of don't even know that you're doing them. They just are automatic, and that's great. It takes about 21 days for a habit to stick. There's a lot of debate if that's really the case. So if you are trying something, try it for a time. If it doesn't work for you, move on. But you've got to give it some time in order to try it, because otherwise if you're jumping from one system to another system, you're just going to confuse yourself. You really want to try to see if something works and set your criteria for how it's working. If you are filing that most recent paper in the front of your file, but you find yourself constantly looking at the back of the file for it, then you know that that's not working for you. You need to tweak that a little bit. As we said before, piles are deferred decisions, and piles are not systems. So I don't want you to say, oh, this pile over here, I know everything that's in it, that's my system. Well, that's probably true to some extent, but it's not really working for you efficiently because you still have that pile. It's your endless stack of deferred decision. And not only can piles be deferred decisions, but things like emails stacked up in your inbox, magazines and reference materials stacked on the floor. Essentially what it means is you're not dealing with them, right? It's not helping you with your efficiency if you're just leaving things and stacking them, okay? So creating systems, really key to the organizing process, and something, probably most of you have systems. You may not even realize it. It's just kind of what you do automatically. But think about, take a step back today after this session and in the next couple of days and really think about, gosh, does this system work? Is this the most efficient thing that I can be doing for my workspace and for myself? Okay. Another key in the process is revisiting the value of lists. Now, lists, I'm guessing that a lot of you use lists or have at some point. Sometimes we forget about using lists and we have to go back to them, but it's really valuable to get things out of your head, empty your mind of all the details, because it's not productive for you to try to remember everything. So the first key here is not to try to keep it all in your head. You want to empty it out from your mind. Everyone benefits from having a system for capturing, scheduling, and executing tasks. So your lists are this mechanism. And again, be creative here. You don't have to use one kind of list. And in a minute, I'll talk about some of the different kinds of lists you can use. But writing it down or placing it in your favorite app, here again, technology is key. A lot of people like to use Evernote. There's quite a few others out there that can be used for capturing information in a systematic way, and then being able to have it efficiently there so you can retrieve it. Very key. Think of your lists as roadmaps for you. They're roadmaps for you to follow, but you need to keep them active as well. Okay, just having the same list sitting there without crossing anything out kind of bogs you down instead of making you feel good about getting through things. So you can get overwhelmed with your lists if they're too exhaustive. So really think about the number of things you're putting down on the list, and then maybe subdividing. Your key is obviously to schedule things, not to just have it and have them and act on them, right? Not to just have them sit on the list. So sometimes subdividing the list into a couple of different lists is even more effective than just having one. So a lot of people like to use a today list. So you're just dealing with what you are trying to attempt to get done today, keeping it very short and only the things you know you can get done today, similar to a priority list. Right? You're prioritizing your tasks for today. Other kinds of lists that you can think about, this week list, okay? Just referring to what you're trying to get done this week. There are short-term versus long-term lists. You can do things on your list that you just want to try to focus on in the short term when you know there are other things that you may need to do in the longer term, dividing it up that way. Another popular one, I don't necessarily see a lot of people using this, but it's becoming more popular, is a running list of 5-minute tasks that allow you to do things between larger projects. These are called micro movements, and that's something to consider, especially for those of you who, at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned, work on the big projects, the exhibit development projects that kind of swallow you up, the new programs being developed, the grants that have strict deadlines, and you kind of drop everything else while you're working on those, and then you have these incredible stacks of things to get back to. So sometimes if you keep a list of running 5-minute tasks, you can actually do them in between working on these larger projects, and then you're not as behind the 8 ball as you would have been if you didn't focus on some of these. Another kind of list that some of you want to consider is a someday maybe list. This is kind of like the ideas that pop into your head that maybe you don't want to forget about them, but you're maybe unsure that they have to be acted on immediately. We all know our board members sometimes come up with great ideas for us to do, but it may not be that feasible that we do them right away or maybe even at all. But you want to keep them, in that ongoing list, but it doesn't need to be on your to-do list, crowding that space. You want it somewhere else. Another list that is growing in popularity is a not-to-do list. Sometimes it helps people to remember and focus on what they shouldn't be doing. Are you checking your email too many times a day? Put that on your not-to-do list. Just check it a couple of times. So think about the different kinds of lists that might work for you, and it's really different for everybody. It's not a simple thing where everyone can create, a to-day list and, be efficient. You really need to think about what you're doing. And as I said, you need to keep these lists active. Use action words on your list. So, for example, if you're trying to remember to contact somebody, are you contacting them by phone or by email? Be specific. If you're contacting by phone, can you put that phone number right on your to-do list so you don't have to go find it when you need it? Same with the email address. Do you have the email address right there? So, it's right on your to-do list, makes it a little faster. So you want to also think about making sure your list works for you in understanding the difference between projects and tasks. And projects are a collection of tasks. So your big exhibit development projects, your program development, a big evaluation project, that's a collection of tasks. There's multi-steps, many steps involved in getting those completed. But a task is one activity, a single step. So what are you putting on your to-do list? You want to look at what you're putting on there and make sure you're not bogging yourself down with too many details. There's a threshold for the number of things on a to-do list. Some people say 10 is enough to have on a to-do list. It really varies. I know some people will put more on, some people fewer. The thing to remember is that a list is not a dumping ground for every single thing you need to do, because that will, again, bog you down. You don't want to look at an inbox with 2,300 messages in it, and you don't want an endless to-do list. So that's something to consider. And you can schedule some time with yourself, maybe every week, every other week, to create and review your list to keep focusing your energy. Okay, that's very important to think about. Okay. So another component to staying organized, the number 2 component, is having the right tools. And when I say tools, it's really about anything that helps you to get the job done, anything that works for you. One of the things in the organizing profession that we talk about is containerizing things, possessions, paper, giving it boundaries, letting it have a holder so it's not spreading and not taking over your space. So these are tools that you'll use. One of the tools that I suggest people use, because paper is a very large challenge, are some of the things you see here on the screen. They're all upright holders. And those upright holders keep your paper from piling. So it's really important to think about that, because you're keeping it off of the horizontal surface that way. The access is a lot different. Apps with a purpose are great. Are there apps that you're using to, manage your tasks and projects? Is there software you're using for collections management? That's great. These are the tools that you need to think about to keep yourselves organized, efficient, on track. Another thing to consider is when we talk about holders, again, going back to the lack of resources that museums have, you don't want to be ordering, hundreds of dollars of supplies for your staff. A lot of times it's fun to raid the kitchen. Our kitchen spaces, or where we prepare food in the museums, often have a lot of extras. I have never been in a museum kitchen that didn't have extra mugs and bowls and trays, and all of those things you can use to corral your supplies and items together, whether on your desktop or on a shelf or someplace else in your office. You may have things at home that you can repurpose and bring into your space. So look around, be creative. Don't always feel like you have to go purchase things. And in fact, one of the most important things that you can do as you're organizing and having containers and holders is to repurpose and reuse. Okay, the purpose is not to have you spend money here. It's to look at what you have and be resourceful, which I think we all are as museum people. The containerizing, again, it gives you boundaries. And another thing to consider is, should you keep it in a clear holder? Right? Will a clear holder allow you to see inside of it? You can see this clear one on the left here on the screen. That's really great if you can be able to see inside of it. But that isn't always the most important thing. It's whatever your preference is for the item. But clear holders, things like mason jars, glass mason jars, oftentimes people that are working on exhibit preparation like to have nuts and bolts and nails and tools inside clear containers and holders like mason jars, so you can actually see where your items are. Another component to having the right tools is thinking about your calendar system. A working calendar system is really important to block out time, obviously to schedule meetings. It runs your life pretty much, your calendar system. Maybe you need to sync it with your family or others on staff. But don't feel like you have to use an electronic system just because that's what everybody else does. If a paper calendar works for you, that's fine too. Sometimes it's impossible in the workplace to do that if everybody wants to sync all their meetings and schedules. But if you're feeling like you also want to keep a paper calendar just as a visual reminder for yourself and it's not too overwhelming, it's, again, key to remember what works for you. So think about that. And the, as we said, the technology and the apps, really key. Task and project management, list keeping, collections management, software and password management, email management, all of those components, the right tools are key. And it takes a little time to discover the right tools. Your colleagues are always a great resource for that, and I'm happy to share ideas for apps and things to use for managing time and information as well if people have some of those questions. Okay, processing the paper. The number one piece of keeping your office organized and your workspace moving in the right direction. Paper is the number one organizing challenge, clear and above any other challenge that people have with organizing. It was voted the biggest burden to small businesses. It comes at us constantly. The use of paper actually went up with the advent of email. Okay, we have work papers, we have mail, we have receipts, school papers. Sometimes we're teaching classes. Sometimes we have kids that are bringing things home. There's a lot of paper out there. And though we are definitely becoming more digital and we use digital tools and technology a lot, it still hasn't eradicated the paper that we deal with. And it's just kind of a fact of life in terms of dealing with paper. The first step in dealing with paper is to kind of to just accept that the influx is not going to stop, right? It's going to keep coming at us, but we can set up systems to manage how it comes at us, and that's what we need to consider. It's okay to have paper, but you need systems to deal with it, and you also need time to deal with it, time to process it. Again, 5 minutes at the end of the day, 10 minutes twice a week. Set that time aside. Think about it's. We got to reduce the paper because honestly, a little processing avoids a huge, overwhelming pile later. And that's something to consider. Try to keep things in equilibrium if you can. The paper that comes in, the paper goes out, right? Keep things in equilibrium. Your mail is very key, too, in this process. I think we tend to, just let mail pile up sometimes because it's not the most important thing maybe that we're dealing with. But mail, both at home and in the office, can be dealt with pretty quickly. Have the right tools there, your recycle bin right by you as you're going through your paper and your mail. That's really key. That helps. And, obviously a recycle bin in different locations is great because that helps us to think about what we don't need to save, what we can pass on. Just an interesting statistic. If you get 10 new pieces of paper in your office every day and only discard one, you'll have an additional 3,285 pieces of paper after 1 year's time. Okay, so that's a lot of paper. Definitely a lot of paper happening there. And you want to really think about that equilibrium so you're not getting overwhelmed with the volume. Okay, if you're part of a project team, are you all saving the same paper constantly because you all need it? Well, okay, maybe when your project's ongoing you need that, but when your project's done, you may not need all have those same papers in your file, right? Maybe it's time to archive the file and just keep one copy of everything. There's another statistic. The average office has 19 copies of every document, right? So duplication in offices is a very, very big issue, and it is definitely a big issue in museums. I can guarantee you that. Saving that multiple copies of the same thing. So really important to think about that. Do you have a process set up for this? Do you want to create one? Something that is something to think about as well. Okay, so the same thing with paper that I talked about in the last slide, keeping it upright. One of the things about keeping it upright, and I'm just going to go back to the slide here to show you. One of the things I like to say about the upright holders is I call them just right holders. And just right holders means they're just right for holding a certain volume of paper, and then that's time to deal with it. Okay, so it's very different from a pile on your desk that never has an end, right? The pile can keep going and going up to your ceiling. Has no end, has no kind of just right mechanism to it. The just right mechanism of these types of holders is when they fill up, that's your signal to deal with it. Okay, you need to go through the files, go through the magazines, go through the resources, whatever it might be. You want to process the paper, and that just right is what you have to say to yourself, you know, it's ready to be processed. I need to go through it. Because you can't fit any more in there, right? And you're not, some people, I have a couple of clients that would, you know, just go out and buy some more holders, but that's not going to solve anything, right? You know, in a couple of cases that might be okay for specific projects or reasons, but really you want to deal with the simplicity of having just a couple and deal with them on your desktop. Okay, because remember, piles are deferred decisions. Okay. Also with reducing paper, you want to think about, and I know everybody has, but just a reminder, scanning, saving fewer documents, insisting on digital. Can you email me that instead of sending, you know, putting the paper on my desk? Stopping newsletters and magazines, and stop printing out. So being mindful of the process. And I think we're all pretty good about that, but sometimes when we get busy, we forget. Another thing that can help you with paper is to realize that if it helps you to streamline, you can think about 6 actions that have to be dealt with, okay? There are pretty much just these 6 in one form or another that you're going to be able to do in terms of working with the paper. You're either going to file it, you're going to act on it, you're going to schedule some action for it. Hopefully you can discard it, right? You can put it in the recycle bin and not think about it again. You can shred it if it's of a personal or financial matter that you don't want anyone to find for some reason. Or you can delegate it, right? Move it on to where it needs to go. So really think about that. At home, one of the things you can do is you can start to opt out of, with the Direct Marketing Association and others, you can start opting out of mailings. And this works to a point. Sometimes it's not a perfect science, but it's the same thing to think about. I know that a lot of museum people are overwhelmed with, the newsletters and the magazines and, the office supply catalogs and really stuff still coming at us, right? It's coming at us constantly. It's that unload, that barrage. So streamlining, really think about that, the solicitations that come to us constantly. What can we do to reduce it? So if you're going through the mail and you have solicitations, discard it, recycle it, get it moving if you're not interested in it. Don't leave it sitting on your desk for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, how long it's going to sit there. Okay, just another slide for you to see some of the other kinds of upright holders that can be used. Again, these are different styles. There's office supply stores have them. I bet some of your supply rooms have them hidden and tucked away. And again, it's keeping the paper upright and it's not letting it pile. And again, just right holders so that you deal with the paper when the just right holder is full. So that kind of concludes the content that I wanted to share with you today, the 7 ways to stay on top of your game as it relates to being organized and getting things done. Now, there's a couple of last thoughts I want to leave you with, and those are that there's a large element of self-awareness and kind of mindfulness that's involved as part of this, taking a step back and really looking at how you function on a daily basis rather than just forging ahead with business as usual, like I think we all tend to do. Sometimes we marginalize in our profession, in a lot of different professions, we marginalize the importance of skills such as organization. We don't value it as an essential skill, like public speaking or something like that. We just kind of forge ahead with our busyness and say, I can keep piling. I know where everything is. It's not an issue. But honestly, I've seen over and over again the difference it makes. Being more organized, it builds efficiency, saves time, saves money, definitely reduces stress, and it helps to move our goals forward. And honestly, that's why we're all here, to fulfill our mission and our vision and to move those goals forward. So this is definitely a process that can help. I know definitely we're awash in stuff and data we get on an ongoing basis. If you think about what comes at you every day, the emails, the postings, newsletters, voicemail, paper notes, newspapers, tweets, blogs, phone calls, and personal interruptions, right? Texts, everything. So it's really, really key to have systems to deal with the constant barrage. It's really the only way that we're going to be able to move ahead and not get stuck and overwhelmed. So if I can make a recommendation for you, later doesn't exist, do it now. It's definitely to your benefit to take time to get organized and keep doing it. It's an ongoing process. And, try to finish what you start before you move on to the next space. And definitely think about getting organized and the benefits that go along with it. And I guess, Heather, we can open it up for some questions now if people would like to do that.
Yep, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in now while we have Marilyn on the phone with us. And also Sarah Sutton mentioned Paper Karma is an app that you can stop unwanted mailings. I know I need to give that one to my mother. I do actually have a couple questions for you because I'm sitting here looking at my workspace. I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed. How would you suggest I start, or what's the first thing I should do?
Sure. So many people use the expression overwhelmed when they are dealing with an overload of things. So that's very common. It's nothing to feel bad about. That's the first thing, to know that you're in good company. The first thing you want to do is you need to look around your space and say, I'm just going to start, and I'm going to start small, right? I'm going to work with one drawer, one shelf, one cabinet, just one very small space. And you're going to start to sort your items out so that you see what you have, and you're going to start to make decisions, right? You're going to go through and you're going to decide what to keep and what not to keep, and what will actually go back in the space. So I think the thing with being overwhelmed is, number one, to know that you're not the only one. It definitely happens to the best of us. And then you really need to start small and build your momentum, because you can't do an entire office, an entire room in just one day. It really is a process.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier about, time and stuff like that we're always being barraged with different things. How much time do you think it should take?
So for time, it's really about how fast you can make decisions. It's very personal. If you set aside time to get organized, you really want to think about doubling or tripling the time, because honestly, once we start to look at things and make decisions about them, it always takes a little bit longer than we think. So you don't want to, devalue the process by doing less and not having enough time scheduled. So make sure you double or triple the time you think it's going to take. And if you do it regularly, you won't have to do that quite as much. If you do set aside that, 10 minutes at the end of every day to get organized for the next day, then you're not going to have to worry about, this is taking me, so long to do. You're actually devoting time to it consistently. So you have to remember it's a process. So devote the time to it and schedule it, And know that when you're first starting, it's going to take longer because it's based on how quickly you can make decisions.
And then Christine Costa here in the chat feature, if anybody has any questions, just a reminder. Sounds like she's playing a game here. She likes to set a timer for 5 minutes. She says that you can do amazing things in 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's an excellent
I feel like
idea.
I'd be playing a game of some sort with that one buzzing at me all the time.
Well, it's a great idea. It's actually something that teachers and parents sometimes use for young children. Is making it a little bit of a game to get things. In the kindergarten classroom is kind of the epitome of organization. Kindergarten teachers have places for everything, and oftentimes will play games with kids to get them to return the things to their correct places. And oftentimes, as Kristen is pointing out, a timer is set to do that, or music is played in a certain amount of time and then stops. It's a really effective technique. There's a technique called the Pomodoro technique for productivity. It's doing your work in 20-minute segments and then getting up and doing something different to focus energy and attention and allow you to have a little bit more efficiency in what you do. So thanks for bringing that up, Kristen. That's great.
Okay. And then Dawn Salerno also mentioned a cheap nonprofit in Providence. I'll let you guys read that there. And what about the rules? Like, I haven't looked at the file in a year, so that mean I can throw it out? Is that a good rule, or depending upon the type of file?
Yeah, so if you haven't looked at a file in a year, it could mean a couple of different things, right? It could mean that that's a past project. It could mean it's just not something you've done this year. So that's why it's important to set up kind of different zones in your space. The active, that's obviously a file that's you're not going to keep in your active zone. But it may need to go kind of in your reference zone for now because you're not positive if you need it again. So that could stay in a reference zone. If it's something that institutionally you've decided has to be kept, eventually it can go to the archive. If you don't feel it has any of that categorization, then you need to go through the contents, maybe see if anyone else on the staff has a need for it. If not, it's probably something that you don't need to save. But oftentimes I find in museums, rather than just saving versus tossing, it's important to think about the process and is this something we might need again, right? If you're an education director and you keep files about past programs, you may want to keep those because it might be a program you want to do 2 years down the road. And can you digitize the material too? Can you scan it and keep it organized in a folder that way? Also a consideration, I think.
Typing there. So I have nieces, and they love to give me stuff that mean a lot. So I end up bringing them into the office. If I get organized, what do I do with them?
Right. So you have to remember, if people give you things, people give you gifts, you have to separate that from the item itself. It's different. And you don't have to save the item just because somebody gave it to you. It's not incumbent upon you to feel like you have to save something for somebody coming to look for it. They're probably not going to remember. You need to save things, and people are not gifting something to you because they want you to feel the burden of it. They want you to enjoy it. If you're not going to enjoy it, it doesn't serve a purpose for you, you need to think about donating it, right? There's a lot in our spaces that we can donate and move on to others that they can use. And especially as museum people, I think that's really important to think about because reuse and readapting things is great. We don't have to keep them in our spaces just because they take up space.
I actually have a bunch of cohogs from a previous conference looking at me right now. So speaking of things that mean a lot.
Well, and think about, as you personalize your space, are those the things you want to represent your personality? Or, are they reminders of positive experiences? And that's fine. But just how many of those do you need? I guess is the question. And,
Sarah said that she started using a stand-up desk. It's taken her a little while to use it regularly, but she found that it became the preferred workspace if she only has one task to do the desk, and it's the next priority. All the other tasks wait on the sit-down desk for me.
That's great, Sarah.
Way to organize things. Yeah,
it's great. It's a very active way to work, and it's a super idea. A lot of places are doing that, and ergonomically it's supposed to be good to use either a really comfortable chair or to stand for a time while you're working, keep the blood flowing. So that's a great idea, Sarah. I love that.
So it looks like we are out of questions unless anybody else has any last-minute ones. Marilyn, I want to thank you so much for imparting your wisdom here. I know we probably will be turning and looking at our desks in a minute. So do you have any wrap-up stuff that you would like to talk about? Or?
Sure. Well, just to have people think about, as we said, getting started and starting small and making sure that you schedule time to get organized, because in our busyness of life, we all forget the basics, I think, of getting organized sometimes. So, keep it in your calendar and really think about it, because it is one of those kind of soft skills that we sometimes don't highlight as much as we need to. And there's definitely a lot to think about with it. So take it a little bit at a time, little chunk at a time. And my contact information is here. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to chat with people, email, phone, whatever works. And thanks everybody for spending your lunch hour thinking about organizing.
Yep, and we have one last-minute question here, Marilyn.
Sure.
Do you have any suggestions for creating a project timeline, or would this kind of be more of an offline thing?
I think that would be a little bit of an offline thing, because we would have to figure out whether it's visual or digital of nature. So Sharon, I'd be happy to chat with you more about that offline, because I think that that probably is pretty specific.
Okay, and then I also want to mention, I forgot to mention it earlier, that the PowerPoint presentation will be online later this afternoon along with the recording from today. So if you want to have anybody watch this, which I think everybody's going to suggest another person watch it, it should be on the NEMA website later this afternoon. So I want to thank everybody for participating today and coming and listening to Marilyn, and we hope to see you at a future Lunch with NEMA. Thanks, everybody.